were going to show up.
Amnesia: The Dark Descent, a game that I, and more than likely you, have heard a lot about. The studio Frictional Games, who had previously created the Penumbra series, put out a title which would take the gaming world by storm. Many call it a masterpiece and inspiration in the horror genre when it comes to video games. Dark Descent came out in 2010. Oh god, it's 2024, I feel old now. Dark Descent became a YouTube and content creation staple. Everyone was playing it, or if too scared or unable to play themselves, were watching countless hours of personalities get scared on the internet. In many ways, Amnesia not only birthed a new era for horror games, but for online content creation as well. I remember fondly staying up way past my bedtime as a young wormling, still residing in my parents' cave, watching many content creators go through Amnesia. The thrill of the horror game only being enhanced by my personal fear of hearing my father's talons cracking as he walks past my sleeping enclave, scared that he would catch me up at the late hours and then me being caught red-handed and trouble. In many ways, Amnesia was and still is one of the first times that I personally realized I wanted to get into content creation. It took me many years to get there, but in the end, it is only fitting that I do my own playthrough and analysis of the game that I remember so fondly. And as funny as this may sound, I do not know anything past the initial maybe 20 to 30 minutes of the game, as I was really into custom stories back in the day, and I remember almost nothing from the base game. So this experience was essentially a blind one for me. Welcome in, my fellow dragons. Today, we are going back into the dark and brooding Castle Brennengurg to take a look into the story and realize the themes that we can take away from the adventure we have just gone through. To do this, we will look at the story that Amnesia: The Dark Descent tells, and the setting that it tells it in. After these are established, we can dive into the themes of running from mistakes, eldritch horror and the unknown, as well as personal progress through overwhelming and intimidating situations. Welcome to the Dragon Den. My name is Winter. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. These are my afterthoughts of Amnesia: The Dark Descent.
Nice! Into the darkness we go. This is a maze. I am so turned around. Oh, get me out of there. Oh, okay. I'm going to go absolutely insane. Oh my god.
The story of Amnesia: The Dark Descent actually starts long before the events that play out in-game. Daniel, the protagonist, was bullied as a kid. This bullying is possibly related to Daniel's nyctophobia, or fear of the dark. After school, Daniel starts working at the British Museum under a Professor Herbert, and at one point they undertake an expedition to Algeria, where Daniel gets trapped inside of a tomb and finds an orb. He then gets rendered unconscious. Upon rescue, though, he is found clutching broken pieces of the orb that he found within, and is sent back to London to recover. It is later found out that Professor Herbert's expedition was a failure due to some unknown catastrophe that killed nearly everyone in the expedition. This incident occurs due to another orb that Professor Herbert had found, and the same thing is actually happening to Daniel. During his research on the pieces of the orb, Daniel realizes that everyone he comes in contact with in regards to the orb winds up dead. In his desperation, he sends letters to several people of note. However, only response he receives is by Alexander, the Baron of Brennengurg. Alexander is a man surrounded by mystery. Rumors of him achieving immortality run rampant in the town close to Brennengurg called Allstadt, located in Prussia. And the Black Eagle, an organization of nobility in Prussia, has gone through several generations. The new generations of this organization grow suspicious of Alexander, who is also a member, being involved in some kind of foul play. Alexander, growing fearful of an attempt at his life as suspicions rose, decided it was time to up the pace. He attempted what he calls the final ritual. However, he was unprepared, and the original orb that Alexander secured during his studies with Agrippa and Johann Weyer broke into pieces. This puts his plan to return to his homeworld, a realm beyond Earth, on hold indefinitely until he can secure another orb. Enter Daniel, a man in desperate need of safety and answers. Alexander welcomes Daniel into his castle, explaining that a shadow is following him, killing everyone in his way to reclaim the orb that Daniel took from that home in Algeria. Once again, Alexander puts his plans into motion. He uses Daniel, like Wilhelm before him, to gather resources for that final ritual that Alexander claims to Daniel will get rid of the shadow that is currently following him. Alexander and Daniel capture people and imprison them on the pretense that they are criminals. They are then tortured to extract an essence called vitae that is needed for the ritual. Daniel finds out that Alexander lied about the prisoners being criminals, and then feeling guilt from the actions and atrocities he has committed, takes a amnesia potion that is used in the torture process, and stages a note to instruct his amnesiac self to kill Alexander. This kicks off the events of the game, where Daniel will now go through the Castle Brennengurg to return to the inner sanctum where Alexander is to kill him. Meanwhile, the shadow is running rampant, turning the castle into a fleshy nightmarescape. On his journey, Daniel runs into the husk of Agrippa that uses what seems like telepathy to communicate with Daniel. Using a mixture of several ingredients under Agrippa's instruction, Daniel beheads Agrippa, whose consciousness is still intact thanks to the potion, and takes him with to the inner sanctum to confront Alexander. The ending I got, by destroying the pylons that were powering Alexander's portal, is considered the selfish ending, because Agrippa was wanting to use the portal to reunite with Johann Weyer on the other side of the portal. However, we did not let Agrippa go through before destroying it. Daniel then walks out of the castle, free of the shadow and of Alexander. The setting of Amnesia is a dark and decaying castle that gives off lots of medieval vibes. Through the dark, brooding, and coldstone hallways you will wander solving puzzles and evading the horrific creatures that still wander around you doing Alexander's bidding. What is interesting though is that the stone of the castle has a unique feel to it, not necessarily making the player uneasy. The term that I would use to describe it is one that I learned from another content creator, the Librarian, who describes the feeling as creepy comfy. That being the feeling of security within your current environment, but knowing or feeling that something is just beyond your senses, waiting for you. This creepy comfy feeling is only expanded when the shadow starts to convert the environment into a hellish, fleshy mess, forcing you to continue into the unknown as your secure area is taken over, causing you to be on the search for a new one. In your traversal through the castle, the sounds and music that make up the sound design shine like golden stars. From the moans of the long deceased to the growls of the monsters and the calming music after an adrenaline-pumping chase sequence. I would absolutely call the sound design of Dark Descent a masterclass in immersion. I felt safe in those secure areas because the music and non-threatening or scary sounds until the shadow took it over with another worldly sound that over the course of the game I grew to dread. Another great aspect of the environment and setting is the recurring motifs. Most notable is the use of water. Early on, you get put into the sequence where there is nothing but water covering the ground, with an invisible monster that you later come to know as the Karink. I'm not even gonna try to understand how to pronounce that thing. The K monster, the water monster, whatever you want to call that. Karink. Okay. This monster is only seen through its splashes, chasing you while you are in contact with the water. The adrenaline and nerves you feel during this section imprint upon you that water is dangerous. And later, the game plays with this, having a completely safe area that has water. The imprint from that early sequence causes the player to be extremely fearful of the water and on edge the entire time in that area, even though they are completely safe in reality. One of the largest inspirations of the Dark Descent is H.P. Lovecraft and eldritch horror. Lovecraft had an extreme fear of the unknown, and this reflected in his work. The unknown is ever present in the Dark Descent, from the basic unknown of what awaits down at the end of a corridor to the much more Lovecraftian unknown as the shadow that is chasing Daniel. This shadow is the embodiment and most visible eldritch horror in Amnesia, as it is an unknowable being that is never really seen, and the motivation is never clear. The only thing that we know is that it will kill and destroy everything in its path to reclaim the orb that is now in the possession of Alexander. Alexander, in turn, wants to use the orb to return to his own homeworld. This realization turns him as well into an unknown entity. Where or what is his homeworld? Why is he cut off from it? Why is he on Earth to begin with? Why does the Shadow not want him using the orb to return? If Alexander needs the orb to return home, then you would think that the Shadow would be a part of his culture and he would be allowed to use it. But in many ways, it seems like the Shadow is actually using Daniel to stop Alexander. Instead of outright killing Daniel, it's like the Shadow uses Daniel and guides him through the Castle of Brennengurg to take down Alexander. And in return, Daniel is allowed to walk free at the end. I would love to know the lore and reasoning behind my aforementioned questions, and we do have 3 more games in the franchise, so maybe my questions will be answered or maybe not. The unknown in the Dark Descent, however, plays a major role, and I believe it is intentional that Alexander's Shadow are left so open-ended. They are not from this world, and thus we as the player fear them, reflecting on the human race's fear of the unknown. Lovecraft was extremely racist towards anyone that was not Caucasian. This racism can be clearly seen throughout all of his works, stemmed from his own fear of the unknown. He was familiar with his small town of Providence, Rhode Island, and was fearful to a point that today we would probably consider it clinically mentally ill of anything that did not represent his whitewashed hometown. This can be extrapolated to the human race as a whole. Anything outside of our home bubble, Earth, we as a majority are fearful of to varying different degrees, and this is shown in the Dark Descent with the Shadow and Alexander. What we should take away is to not fear the unknown, instead just be cautious and respectful of it. Lovecraft never overcame his own fear of the unknown, and unfortunately never really left his bubble of Providence. If you can overcome that fear, and instead move into whatever new thing life has in store for you with caution, curiosity, and respect, it has a large probability to be beneficial to you, just as Daniel and the Shadow somehow formed a mutually respective bond at the end to take down Alexander, and in turn, Daniel's sister ended up recovering from her illness, whereas in the bad ending, Hazel dies when Daniel and the Shadow are unable to come to an understanding. It's not just fear of the unknown that can stop progress. Simply being intimidated by a task before you, like me writing the script you are listening to right now. I've been staring at a Word document for the past several days, not knowing how to write my thoughts, where to even start, or if I have done enough research, conveniently getting distracted with other things that are not as important as the task that I am putting off, simply because of the scope of it is intimidating. This act of procrastination is not unique to this dragon, however. Many people suffer from various intensities of procrastination issues for various different reasons. The Dark Descent calls attention to procrastination in a very interesting way. It's actually one of the core game mechanics, that being the sanity system. The more Daniel stays in the dark, or the more he witnesses unsettling events, the more his sanity drains. This sanity can only be recovered by making progress in the game, solving puzzles, or entering certain areas for the first time. At least in my own personal experience, the longer you go without making progress on that one task you need to do, the more your sanity will slowly be drained from the various darknesses or events that take place beyond your control. The more you don't focus on making progress and instead trying to explore every dark nook and cranny for absolutely every piece of the puzzle you think you need, the more resources you will use and sanity you will use up, until at a point you will only have ... left. This can manifest in many different ways, from having a mental breakdown to anxiety, sleep loss, or even more extreme things. The only way to stay sane is to make progress and keep pushing forward in your own life, just as Daniel is forced to do in a situation that is vastly over his own head.
Wait, no, we won't regain sanity by standing in the light. We have to freaking make progress to regain sanity, because even when you're like not doing good, it forces you to press on.
There is no way for you or I to know every outcome or the correct path to take. We can only progress and take it one save point at a time. We need to use our sparse resources like tinderbox's oil and our time for what is important and what we know we need to do to make progress for our own goals and ambitions. And just as we progress in life, just as Daniel does in The Dark Descent, just as I am finally sitting down to write the script at 4 a.m. in the morning, we will retain our sanity and resources and actually be ready for what life has to throw at us. Even while making progress, there is one final thing that we can learn from Daniel in The Dark Descent. We will make mistakes. Since we have no option but to push forward into the unknown, mistakes in any form that they might take are inevitable. Unlike Daniel, however, we must not run from them. The mistake Daniel made was not being cautious and respectful to the unknown. While eventually rectified in the good ending, initially Daniel just assumes the orb is his for the taking without proper study or research. So he takes the orb, and as the shadow attempts to retrieve it, Daniel is the one leaving death and destruction in his wake as he runs from his mistakes. In a note, we learn that Agrippa himself discovered an orb, but when the shadow took it back to Agrippa, he was unharmed, showing that the shadow is not interested in direct harm, but only in security of the orb. If Daniel had simply returned the orb, there was a high chance he would have been unharmed as well. Instead, he ran, and the further he ran, the worse and worse he made it, to the point where he was torturing and killing and doing horrible acts in the name of self-preservation. However, in the end, once again, it is shown that the shadow is only interested in security of the orb after Daniel helps it take down Alexander, and it lets Daniel walk away. The lesson to be learned is to accept the mistakes you make and learn from them. Do not be shy to admit shortcomings and unsuccessfulness, as in the long term, these experiences will teach you how to be successful in the future. Those that try to run from their mistakes will learn nothing and keep making more and more of the same errors, to the point that they will be so ashamed that in their mind, rash acts are the only course of action, as seen with Daniel taking the Amnesia potion. Amnesia: Dark Descent was a wild ride. As I am concluding this script, I feel a sense of accomplishment. I felt so unworthy to make an analysis of this game, one that I know is held in such high esteem in the horror genre. On top of that, I was unsure of how to write this follow-up to the quality and insight for my score analysis. However, the more I wrote on the script, the more and more ideas started coming to me, and the more that I wanted to convey those feelings and ideas that I have even now, weeks after completing the game. And I also feel like I learned more about myself and my mannerisms from The Dark Descent, more about what inspires me and how my brain works. I hope that I have been able to pass that along to you as well. I have a strong suspicion that I may revisit this video and script in the future once I have gotten even better at laying out and talking about the themes and experiences that I gather from these experiences that we go on. Even in these last few seconds, my mind is buzzing with ideas and theories that make my scales tingle. I am extremely excited for our next adventure, and I hope to have you join me in the Dragon Den.
Everything's wavy. Wavy.
Good hunting, and fly safe, my fellow dragons.